Hi YouTube, this is Jonathan at the Piano Lesson. Welcome back. So I've been kind of rooting around on YouTube looking at all kinds of interesting music videos, and I wanted to share some of the things that I ran across, which I think are really kind of fascinating and interesting, and probably things that one might not ordinarily run across or know about. Seemingly, if you knew about them, you would think they were very odd. They kind of are odd. One of the things that I ran across, believe it or not, was some YouTube videos, discussions about music, about Bach, about jazz, and they were hosted by William F. Buckley Jr., the infamous conservative, if anyone knows him. Sidebar, he has a son named Christopher, who's a very funny writer, who just wrote something in the New York Times. It's very funny, but he was kind of a patron of the arts. I don't know. He did love the harpsichord, which is probably in keeping with his affected personality. And he did publish a book to learn the piano, which I actually used for a little while. It was kind of interesting. I don't know. But he had several guests on the show, which of people that would really be good to know. One was Rosalind Turek, who was one of the preeminent performers, scholars on Bach. So I'll talk about that a little bit, and what she had to say and what he had to say, and vice versa. And also ran across an interesting video with the great Billy Taylor. If you're not acquainted with Billy Taylor, again, another great scholar on jazz, Dr. Billy Taylor, no longer with us, unfortunately. And William F. Buckley was kind of a classical music snob, but he did have this segment on jazz, and he was very nice throughout the whole thing. I was quite shocked that he didn't make some kind of snide remark. In fact, I think he made more snide remarks on the classical segment than he did on the jazz segment. And there were also some very interesting interviews with Marian McPartland, the great Marian McPartland. Used to have a regular jazz radio show on for many years, and she passed away. And actually, her show, unfortunately, her show started to wane because there was waning interest in jazz. But again, one of the top flight pianists of all time. Sometimes people likened her to the female version of George Shearing, if you know George Shearing. And her show was kind of funny because she had the most wonderful people on them. She had absolutely, anyone was on her show. But oddly enough, I hate to say it, but I don't think she was a great interviewer. She's a very sweet woman and very humble, considering her, command of the instrument and her prowess and all. But she was just it was so homespun. It was so folksy. She would just sort of interview people, and she'd say, "Gosh, that was really good. Wasn't that good? Yeah, that was good. Wasn't that fun?" So I don't know. I kind of felt uncomfortable listening to the show because not that much came out necessarily in terms of her. Things came out, but it was kind of despite the fact that she was maybe very shy. I don't know. But there was one particular segment with Walter Becker and Donald Fagen from Steely Dan, which was quite interesting. And they're actually playing a little trio, a quartet with Jay Lenhart on bass, and it was very interesting. So I'll share some of those insights as well. Music criticism, well, what can you say? One of the things that Rosalind Turek was talking about, it was substantive things that she was talking about, was the question of ornamentation in Baroque music. So what's ornamentation? Well, it's a bit of a loaded word, actually, but she talks about the use of big notes versus these symbols that typically one would encounter as a musician. Now, these symbols were from, mostly from the Baroque era, I guess, about 400 years ago, 1600s. For instance, if rather than writing out, let's say, rather than actually writing out, da da dee da da, right? It's kind of like writing that out. They might write out a symbol that looked like that, okay, and that would be like a trill, okay, something like that. And typically, if this was the main note, the note immediately above it would be referred to as the auxiliary note. And so you could really get into the weeds with this stuff, but there are a whole variety. There are turns, there are shakes, there are partitura, different ways to write music with symbols or little notes, actually. But she was talking about how she had discovered some Bach scores that were finally authenticated and published in the mid-70s that showed conclusively how Bach would have embellished a particular piece of music because he wrote something out. He wrote the notes out explicitly in the big notes, and this was something that for years had been written as a symbol, as a trill, and yet she somehow managed to arrive at the same conclusion that Bach did, which was kind of interesting, and that was based on her musicianship and scholarship and things of that nature. And I say that, a embellishment or a ornament is a bit of a loaded word because, many of these ornaments really are part and parcel of the music. You really can't play a piece of Bach and not do the ornament. It just sounds flat. It just doesn't have what it. So is it really an ornament? I mean, well, it's maybe an ornament in the sense that the notes that are being played are on the periphery of what we might consider to be the main note. Okay, but they are really integral to the process of playing music. And another thing that Rosalind Turk talks about is the use of repeats in classical music and how all of her repeats are different. So typically if you see playing a piece of music, sonata, classical sonata, whatever it is, it could be a Baroque piece too, whatever, and you're playing 8 measures and you see a repeat sign to play the 8 measures again. So typically, mechanically, a lot of people might play it quote unquote differently. So the first time they play it loud, the second time they play it soft, right? Well, that's a very modest attempt at playing it differently, but she really makes a point of playing the repeat radically differently. Now, why does she do that? Well, I think A, it's much more interesting to listen to, but B, the hallmark of a great piece of music, a great work of art, is that it lends itself to a variety of interpretations and perspectives, provided that there's some basis behind what you're doing, some logic, some consistency, right? But that's the beauty of playing classical music. Now, I'm going to kind of segue into jazz in a minute because I think the term jazz and the term classical is kind of an artificial, unfortunately, it's kind of an artificial demarcation, separation that really functions more to serve commerce, right, and people who buy and sell things and buy and sell music than it does to serve the music, because I've always felt that there really is no difference between jazz and classical music in the sense that my definition of jazz is really very simple. It's to take a simple idea and approach it in a variety of different ways, to be open-minded and to open to possibilities. Jazz is more about what might be or could be it's about potential as opposed to being very literal about what's there. And it's the same thing with classical music. And it's the same thing with ornamentation. So getting back, you can play ornaments or add trills or turns or mordants. What's a mordant? A mordant is if you just do, I mean, that's a mordant, okay. Going below, just below, that's below a neighbor, let's say. The main note would be this. If I did, right, that's without the mordant. That's with the mordant, okay. Or, something like that, or like that. I have some wonderful books which are stuck in my storage. I have to get them out. It was a beautiful series of classical method books, and I think they were published by Henley. And in one of them in particular, there was a reference page, a variety of these ornaments, but they were categorized by country. So in France, they would have one set of terminology and ornaments, and in Germany they would have another, and in Italy they would have another. It was really quite fascinating. But the idea that no matter what music you play, it has to sound like it's alive, it has to sound living, and it has to sound like you care and you're paying attention and what you're doing makes sense. Now, we're all sort of struggling and groping, no matter how talented we think we are, educated, music's still a mystery, and that's why so many people are concerned about what Bach wrote, what he really wrote, because there's a lot lost to music publishing, sadly. The same thing with Beethoven. I think Beethoven had something like 20 some odd gradations of dynamic markings, which completely got lost to his copyist. His copyist just didn't care about it, I guess, or whatever, I don't know. I thought it was fascinating that a guy who was profoundly deaf, good part of his life, especially when he wrote his best music, really cared about these fine gradations of dynamics. That's really extraordinary, even more so than the notes themselves necessarily, right, or the ornamentation. So, getting back to Rosalind Turk, she's quite an interesting person. She's most known for playing the Goldberg variations, I would say. What did she say? She said that she learned them as a kid when she was 12 or something like that. She learned them in like 5 weeks. It's unbelievable, just like learn them from memory, incredible. And so that was an important subject that she and William F. Buckley Jr. talked about. Bill Buckley introduces her in the program. It really, if you watch these things, they're like Monty Python skits. I mean, there's so much humor in it because they're just so, I don't know, there's so many affectations, not only in Bill Buckley, but also in, unfortunately, in both of them. And he introduces Bach. He doesn't say, he always has to gild the lily, so he can't say Johann Sebastian Bach. He has to say Johannes Bach. Like, there is no Johannes Bach, okay? That's just FYI, all right? It's this Johann, okay? And there's maybe Johannes Brahms, I don't know, but I mean, there's no Johannes Bach. Rosalind Turk sounds kind of a little overstuffed. She's got big hair, and and she plays harpsichord. She apparently grew up playing harpsichord and organ and clavichord, which is another early keyboard instrument, Baroque instrument. And she kind of insisted, as well as piano, and she kind of insisted that, if you really want to learn to play the piano, you should play all these instruments. I don't know how true that is, What she did say, though, which is quite interesting, is that not only does Rosalind Turk have a different technique for each instrument, which I would imagine you'd have to have, because the harpsichord is played, the tone that mechanically is produced differently than a piano. Harpsichord is produced with what's called a plectrum, so it plucks the string with a quill, as opposed to piano, which is a percussion instrument and strikes the string with a hammer, as opposed to, let's say, a clavichord, which strikes the string with what's called a tangent, a brass tangent. And you can even make a little vibrato on it, apparently. And there are all kinds of other little weird keyboards that I don't know, these little virginals and... but she has a different technique for every composer that she plays. Isn't that interesting? We usually think of technique as this sort of one-size-fits-all, right? Sort of industrial strength scales or whatever they are. But no, she has a different technique for every composer because their music's different, right? Now, she didn't go into it. But if you've ever played a piece of music and maybe you felt like, hey, I'm doing pretty okay on this thing. This is not bad. Play a piece of Beethoven. Like, well, I think I got this licked. And then you open up a piece of Chopin or a piece of Bach, and you're like, I can't play this, right? Well, why is that? Well, is it because the notes are harder? Well, not necessarily, but you might need a different approach physiologically, just on the keyboard, to make it sound musical, right? Even if you can get through the notes themselves, you still might need a different approach. So there we go. Yep. So, and as far as switching over to Bill Buckley's interview with Billy Taylor, the thing that really impressed me with Billy Taylor, well, first of all, the guy is just so erudite and so high-minded and just a very uplifting spirit. So if you haven't listened to much Billy Taylor, he's pretty amazing. He plays and he speaks in the same manner. He's a pretty amazing guy. But I think the thing that he really gets across is the spiritual, is what they used to call Negro spirituals, right? But they used to, out of the slave era and church music. Names that we don't really hear very much, even people like Mahalia Jackson, which we don't hear about much anymore. It has a very austere quality to it, and it's kind of dark to some extent. But it really is the core, I think, really the real core. I mean, people talk about the blues. Oh, jazz comes from the blues, right? Yes, right. But where does the blues come from? Well, I really think that the blues is rooted in the spiritual. A guy like me didn't know too many spirituals growing up, but I've heard them, and so I think it's going to be a subject of some of my videos to come. And if you go online and you listen to, so that was another thing that I was listening to, though I was kind of plugging in these spirituals, and also not just the spirituals, but prison songs, chain gang songs, prison labor, railroad songs, the songs from laborers, songs from people that suffered. Really remarkable music, and very, very sophisticated stuff. I mean, way too good to be done while you're straightening the rails on a rail line. you'd see like 10 guys working on a rail line with these crowbars, and they'd all rhythmically together. When it was time, they would kind of heave ho on the rail line so it would straighten out. A lot of this music came from real sweat and blood and real life experiences. So, and I think that's lost to some extent, well, to a large extent, on the music we hear now. The music we hear now is many generations away from that, and too much emphasis, just way too much emphasis on money, way too much emphasis on, commodifying the stuff and selling it and packaging it, and I for a while I couldn't even look at a new CD or new record because it was like everybody was a fashion model and they were posing in their double-breasted suits and smiling for the camera and showing off their technique, and it was not much to listen to anymore. So anyway, back to Billy Taylor. That was like a big thing that I got out of just listening to him play, and of course talking about the history of jazz, where it came from, and also how a tremendous amount of that music also did come from Broadway. But anyway, that was quite interesting. And then he had Marian McPartland interviewing the Steely Dan guys and Walter Fagan and Walter Becker. Walter Becker and Donald Fagen. Sometimes it might as well be they kind of crisscross. They were big fans of Duke Ellington, believe it or not. They played some Duke Ellington tunes on her show, and a lot of those tunes, a lot of Duke Ellington tunes were actually written by Billy Strayhorn, and vice versa. For instance, Take the A Train. Take the A Train, everyone thinks that, oh, it's Duke Ellington. No, it's actually written by Billy Strayhorn. I even forgot that. But if you listen to that interview, you'll hear how they were influenced by jazz composition. I mean, that's a lot of where their sound came from. If you listen to even the early jazz like Fletcher Henderson, and Jelly Roll Morton, and ragtime. In fact, Billy Taylor talked a lot about ragtime and how the a lot of ragtime had elements of the spiritual in it, spirituals, Negro spirituals. So I don't know. You can really get, as you know, lost on the internet listening to all kinds of interesting stuff that we don't really hear anymore. I should just stop for a second and just say, if you've gotten this far in the video, God bless you. But also, if there's anything you want me to talk about, if anything that, the subject matter that you think, you would like me to cover, feel free to let me know. No one seems to take me up on it, but, I'm right here, and, if you have a question or concern or whatever, or, just give me a holler and post something, and, we'll talk about it. But they talk about one of the things that Billy Taylor talks a lot about in this video with Bill Buckley is the different styles of jazz, and particularly stride, where you take your left hand and you're going back and forth on the keyboard. So they're talking about ways to make the piano sound like a band. you know, one of the things you see now is that usually if you see a jazz piano player play, it's like somehow jazz piano started at Bill Evans or Bud Powell or whatever, but you know that you have the left hand just like crippled, like just kind of clomping on the piano with little chords, and then single line melodies on the right hand like a trumpet. You know, that's really not playing the piano. Not really. I mean, you know, playing the pianos like Fats Waller or James P. Johnson or Willie the Lion Smith, or people who are playing the entire instrument, you know, from stem to stern, from the lowest note to the highest notes, and they're ripping out chords on the piano and you know, arpeggios, and not just for the sake of playing a lot of notes, but heck, you know, if you're playing the piano and you're only playing one note at a time, maybe you should quit the piano and take up the clarinet. You know, I mean, you know, that's really something that was a big pet peeve of what's his name, the infamous teacher on the internet, Barry Harris. That was his pet peeve. That was why he was teaching people these, he called them chords in a scale, but harmonizing the scale, harmonizing the chords, you know, so that when you're playing a melody and you're going, that was his scale, right? The C, D, E, F, G, G sharp, A, B, C. He stuck that extra note in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you end. So it's actually 9 notes. And then you'd play, you know, you'd play a chord, 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 chord. Oh, I skipped a note. Chord, 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 chord. That's it. Chord, 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 chord. That's what you would do. So instead of just playing that one note at a time, and those chords that I played, it's basically just 2 chords. It's basically the C6 played in a variety of versions. And then you have diminished chord played in a variety of inversions. Right? But it's that kind of thing, and being able to play, you know, we're talking about stride, walking tenths, and root, 7th, 10th, that's a lot of artatum stuff. But getting that bigger, you do it with dominant chords too. You don't have to just do it with a 6th chord. You could do it with a dominant chord. Anywho, hope you had a good time. I did too. We're kind of out of time now, but I'll try to post some links so you have a place to go. You kind of know what I'm talking about. I want to open your world a little bit, huh? Well, anyway, this is Jonathan at Piano Lesson. Good to see you. Signing off, and until next time. Bye-bye.